because I'm going to be talking about the 12-step program this summer. Because the 12 steps are so much more than the life-giving vehicle for drunks to get sober. It is that. But it is also the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ in a form you may not have heard before. The 12 steps are a profound way of discovering, following, and learning to live in the peace, the joy, and the freedom in the way demonstrated by Jesus Christ today, even today. This is going to be one of those bear with me messages, so bear with me. The church in America is in trouble. That's a given, yes. But that gives me great hope. And I want to tell you why. However, it will take me all summer to do that. Thus, these 12 steps, 1, sometimes 2 a week for the next 10 weeks. Because in these steps, I know there is liberation. In these steps, I know there is hope, even for those who feel that hope is gone and is no more. In these steps, there is a new church being born. I read an observation this week which will serve as kind of an introduction to this series. Do you remember 15 years ago when there were phone booths and pay phones everywhere you looked? On the sides of stores, beside the front doors, on street corners, everywhere? Today, there are none to be found anywhere. You look around today, you just can't find them anywhere. Now, it would be easy to conclude, based on what we don't see, that people must not care about communicating anymore. No proliferation of payphones can only mean one thing, right? People must not have much to say anymore. Of course, we also know that that would be a wrong conclusion, if not a stupid conclusion. In fact, communication between people has grown exponentially. More people than ever are communicating in more and more ways. We're doing it in new ways, with cell phones, with text, with email. We carry those means of communications around in our pockets instead of going to a wall to use one of those old but now outdated methods. Would it be possible to get people to use payphones again like we used to? Maybe if we redecorated the phone booths, people would want to use them again. Maybe if we made the phones pink, green, and yellow and charged a dime instead of a quarter, people would come back to the 7-Eleven and talk to each other again. But of course they wouldn't. That's nonsense. And here's the analogy. All over America today, there are people, usually over 60, looking around at their half-filled or quarter-filled churches and remembering when they were youngsters in the 1950s and 1960s, and mom and dad and all the aunts and uncles and cousins and friends down the street and friends up the street were sitting shoulder to shoulder in rooms like this one. We look around and make the too easy assumption that people must not have questions about God anymore. They must not feel that spiritual need anymore. They're not here after all. They must not need Jesus Christ the way those people in Sunday suits and patent leather shoes did back in the 1950s. And that's nonsense too. People may not be coming to church the way they used to, but that does not mean they are not looking for those big answers, or that they are not feeling the big problems or wondering about the big questions. It only means they've found other ways which for the time being seem to be meeting those big needs. Seem to be, and that's the key phrase. Because while a majority of Americans will still say they are Christians, and while a supermajority will say they are spiritual, there's a whole lot of disconnect between those assertions and what is happening in the country. Today, this day, 20 veterans of military service will take their own lives. There are today unprecedented spikes in the suicide rates of people my age, baby boomers, the very ones who sat as youngsters with their parents in those once upon a time crowded churches. The United States has the largest per capita rate of incarceration of any country in the world, more than China, more than Russia, more than any Middle Eastern country. And almost every prisoner I've met in the last 20 years has a working Christian vocabulary. They didn't grow up without church. Divorce rates, rapes, high school dropout rates, bullying, hate crimes, the new forms of racism, all of those things point to the fact that despite exponentially increasing ways of being available to know about God, knowing lots of words about God, there is a stunning lack of transformation happening in church or anywhere else, with some few exceptions. And we'll talk about those. Many of those darkest statistics, unfortunately, emanate in their greatest numbers from the states of the so-called American Bible Belt. More and more people know the right words about God, but fewer and fewer seem to be experiencing the turning inside out, upside down, transforming presence of God in their lives. Churches have failed far too often to provide a place, a particular place that can today most often be found in the dusty, coffee-stained rooms of an old shopping center, where there's a triangle on the door which says to those in the know, "Come in as you are, we accept you." The very words Jesus demonstrated wherever he walked, talked, and ministered, "Come in as you are, we accept you," are words that all churches say, and some actually live, but they are words that define every single Alcoholics Anonymous meeting room, every narcotics, overeaters, eating disorders, sexual addiction Anonymous meeting room in the world. I've mentioned there how this whole 12-step program began, and it began when once upon a time, successful stockbroker named Bill W. met a surgeon in trouble named Dr. Bob in Akron, Ohio. And they sat down in a Christian context and simply began talking to each other about staying sober. And that talk then included others and others and others and others and others over these many decades now, since the 1930s. Today, those triangle-marked doorways are all over the place. In Jacksboro, at the First National Bank meeting room on Tuesday nights. In Graham, these are ones that I know where they're at. In Graham, in the basement of the First Methodist Church, and in a converted house on Oak Street. In Wichita Falls, just off the Jacksboro Highway. In Fort Worth, at the Glass House. In Dallas, at Preston Center. And behind TI up on Markville Drive, or just behind Jupiter Lanes, near Garland Road on Centerville. That's the one I first went to in 1993, the one behind Jupiter Lanes. The history that went before my reaching for that triangle-marked door is secondary to the fact that for years, including the first 8 years after I said yes to Jesus, I didn't know how I could or would, or if I could, stop drinking. At first, in the 1970s, I would blame it on the arthritic pain in my back. I could sleep if I could sleep with Jim Beam. But beer, and much more beer, had defined part of every year since high school. And by the late 80s, early 90s, it was every single day, and I didn't know anymore how not to buy an 8-pack of 16-ounce Buds on the way home every evening and begin drinking them almost as soon as they hit the front seat. And I'm sorry if those words disappoint, but I tell them to you because there is a light, a capital L, light of the world, light at the end of that dark, wet tunnel, and at the very beginning of the way that you all now share with me. If you don't know about the darkness of mine, then you will not be able to fathom what this light means to me now. Step 1 of Alcoholics Anonymous says this: we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. It was powerlessness over alcohol, powerlessness over that golden brown buzz that softened the regrets I had about my life, the disappointments and depression I would feel about what I was doing with my life, and the never-ending dull but real pain in my back, acute back then, that seemed to limit every thought or dream I would momentarily have. Powerlessness. Paul wrote of it exactly in his letter to the Romans, chapter 7. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. For I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is, in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. Will. The iron-bound determination to change was not possible in and of myself. Day after day I would pledge to myself, no, not today. But then there was a Red Coleman's right over there, or a 7-Eleven, or a Quick Stop on Lemon. And once again I would do the very thing I hate. I could will what is right, but I could not do it. And yes, I know it sounds absurd in retrospect. But I also know statistically that there are some here who know exactly what I'm talking about. It was on an Emmaus weekend in November of 1993 that I said out loud to God and to another human being, I can't do this. I don't know how to stop. Somebody prayed. I don't know who, and I don't remember anything they said. But I sat there for a while after they stopped, and spiritually and imaginatively handed an 8-pack of Budweiser to Jesus and said the words, maybe out loud, hang on to this for me. So beginning in November of 1993, the new good news in my life became bad news for Red Coleman, 7-Eleven, and the Quick Stop on Lemon, because Jesus is still holding that 6-pack. I've not bought a beer since then. To be honest, I did drink a beer last summer at my son's wedding, but it was enough to know that I'd better not drink anymore. I left Emmaus that weekend, and a friend intercepted me the next day and said, you're going to need help. Go to AAA. He wanted to take me, but I wanted to go by myself and see for myself without someone else telling me what I should see or what he wanted me to see. Pride. So I found that place over on Centerville, and it was a dump. It smelled of 20 years of cigarette smoke and 10,000 pots of strong coffee. There were bikers in there, old and young women with too much makeup, a teenage boy with a KISS t-shirt, and a guy I knew from White Rock United Methodist Church who sang in the choir each week. He saw me and motioned for me to come sit beside him. He leaned over and said, welcome. Embarrassing? Yes, because there'd been a time when I'd been his Sunday school teacher. That was the beginning. I've come to know rooms like that as churches. Sometimes they smell. In the last decades, though, most of them are non-smoking. The people are still often a mess. But I know I am not one bit better or worse than any of them, and they know that about me and each other too. Acceptance, love, and grace fill these rooms as stories are told, as forgiveness is offered, as encouragement is given, and as hope is renewed. But it begins with those words, the hardest words that most human beings have to say. I am powerless. My life is unmanageable. I need help. This is the same language spoken in different words by the prophet Isaiah when it seemed the burden that he had to speak to Israel, an assignment from God, had become unbearable. He cried out to God, my dwelling is plucked up and removed from me like a shepherd's tent. Like a weaver, you've rolled up my life. You've cut me off from the loom. From day to day, you bring me to an end. I cry for help until morning. Like a lion, though, you break all my bones. From day to day, you bring me to an end. My eyes are weary with looking upward. O Lord, I am oppressed. Be my security. These are the words, I am powerless, that each person who seeks the transformed life must speak in whatever language, in whatever words they can muster. Only when my image of myself, my false image born of pride, tradition, or treasure, or whatever, only when I can be honest with God and say, I can't do this by myself, only then the addiction to whatever it is begins to be gone. That's true of the adrenaline-seeking meth addict, the sexually out-of-control man or woman, the overeater trying to fill the emotional emptiness they feel, the rageaholic, the abusing husband, the abused wife, the shopping addict, the television zombie, the one who lives in a life of fear, the one who lives a life of false bravado, the lonely, the broken, the powermonger, the user, and the used. In short, a transforming relationship with Jesus Christ begins for anyone only when they have come to the end of themselves. Only when a person says, I can't do this alone, or I need help, or I've come to the end of my rope, only then can the light, the true light, the capital L light of all humankind begin to shine. And that's exactly how Jesus sees all of us. Matthew 9. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Harassed and helpless, we reach for the door, we pull it open, and the light begins finally to come in. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. Step 1 can just as truthfully be stated this way, and this is the way we will speak of it in the 11 steps to come as well. We admitted we were powerless over sin, over our sin, that our lives had become unmanageable. Whatever that thing is, that thing that has gotten between your ears and God's voice, that thing, that habit, that way of thinking that has gotten between God's heart and your heart, whatever it is that wakes you up at night or keeps you grabbing at your mind all day, that thing, that sin, that thing over which you may feel powerless and which is earning you compounded daily guilt, that thing. I say to you, it's okay to say, I need help. That's the first step. That's the hardest step. That's the step that begins to strip away the lies we tell ourselves about ourselves. That's the step that begins to expose our wounds. And it is only by exposing those wounds, those hurts, that guilt, that sin, that the light, the true light, that capital L light of the world can begin to shine on those wounds and begin to heal them. There's more to say, because already I know transformation has begun to happen today. Next week we'll talk more about the power that is greater than ourselves. Bring a friend. There is hope. Love wins. In the name of God, the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer of our faith. Amen.